The cleaning lady translated the meeting in 7 languages, and the CEO came back the next day with a paper. Melissa Thompson was pushing the cleaning cart down the hallway on the 22nd floor when she heard raised voices coming from the conference room. It was almost midnight, and that floor should have been empty for hours. She hesitated for a moment, but she knew she had to clean that room before the end of her shift. She knocked lightly on the door, and without waiting for an answer, entered with her head down as she always did. The 4 executives around the table didn't even look at her. She started emptying the trash cans when the youngest man, with a neatly trimmed beard, began speaking in Mandarin. Melissa froze for a split second before continuing her work, pretending not to understand a thing. "The factory in Detroit needs to close by the end of the month," he said in Mandarin, tapping his fingers on the table. 300 people will be out of work, but the numbers don't lie. It's the only way to maintain profits." Melissa's heart tightened. Her son Tyler had worked at that factory for 5 years. It was the job that had gotten him off the streets, that had given him a purpose in life after so many difficult years. She kept cleaning, moving through the room like a ghost, invisible to those men in suits. The woman with glasses, whom Melissa recognized as one of the German directors, cleared her throat and switched to her native language. The German words came out fast and precise. "There is a way to prevent this from becoming a public scandal," she said, adjusting her glasses. "I know someone in the union who can be persuaded to accept a compensation, $50,000 in cash, and he guarantees no protests or lawsuits." Melissa felt her legs tremble inside her dark blue uniform pants. That was a bribe. Corruption, plain as day. She bent down to pick up a piece of paper from the floor, hiding her face, which surely would have betrayed her shock. The yellow rubber gloves were damp with sweat. The company's CEO, Richard Harrison, a man with graying hair and an imposing posture, asked for water. Melissa served it with trembling hands, spilling a few drops on the table. He didn't even thank her. To him, she was just part of the furniture. As she placed the glass in front of him, the Japanese executive began speaking in his mother tongue. "The fake documents we created to justify the closure are in the safe," he said, his voice low but clear. "Doctored productivity reports, modified inventories. If anyone investigates deeply, they'll know the factory is completely viable. But with these papers, it will look like an inevitable decision." Melissa wiped the table with mechanical movements, every muscle tense. She felt the weight of that knowledge like stones on her shoulders. She, who had spent the last 10 years being invisible, being ignored, now carried secrets that could destroy careers and change hundreds of lives. The French executive, a middle-aged man with a navy blue tie, sparked up a conversation in French. His voice had a conspiratorial tone. "We need to ensure the diverted money doesn't show up in the company's books," he said, flipping through some papers. "I have contacts in tax havens who can launder it without leaving a trace. We've done this 3 times before and no one ever suspected." Each word was like a punch to Melissa's stomach. She pretended to adjust the cleaning supplies on the cart, turning her back to them, taking a deep breath to control the nausea she felt. How did those people sleep at night? How did they look in the mirror? The Russian executive, who had been quiet until then, intervened in his language. Melissa recognized every word, even though he spoke quickly. "Absolute secrecy," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "If this leaks, we all fall. Richard loses the company, I go back to Moscow in disgrace, and you 3 will never work in the corporate world again. We have to keep this between us." "No one else can know." He looked directly at Melissa for the first time, but his eyes went right through her as if she were transparent. She lowered her head even further, continuing to wipe the same surface for the 3rd time. The German director spoke again, this time in Spanish, addressing the French executive. "We need a scapegoat," she said, taking off her glasses to clean them. "Someone who can take the blame if anything goes wrong. I suggest the operations director from Detroit. He's close to retirement anyway. We can forge some irregularities in his name." Melissa knew that director. Mr. Jenkins, a 65-year-old man who treated every employee with respect, who knew the name of every single person in the factory. An honest man who would be sacrificed by people without scruples. The CEO, Richard, finally spoke, and to her surprise, he switched to Italian. "You have 48 hours to get everything in order," he said, gathering the papers in front of him. "On Friday, we announce the closure. Monday, the factory is sealed. Wednesday, the money is in the offshore accounts, and in a month, this conversation never happened. Understood?" Everyone agreed in their respective languages. Melissa finished cleaning and left the room, her legs barely able to support the weight of her own body. In the empty hallway, she leaned against the wall, the cleaning cart forgotten beside her. 7 languages. They had spoken in 7 different languages, thinking they were safe, that no one there could possibly understand. But Melissa Thompson wasn't just a cleaner. Many years ago, she had been a linguistics professor at a private university in New York City. She had a doctorate in translation and spoke 9 languages fluently. Her life had fallen apart when her husband got sick, when the medical bills consumed their savings, when the university closed during the economic crisis. She had taken that cleaning job because she needed to survive, because Tyler depended on her, because there were no other options. And now, by a twist of fate, by pure coincidence of timing and place, she knew everything. She knew they would close the factory where her son worked. She knew about the bribery, the fake documents, the money laundering. She knew they would destroy an honest man's life to cover up their crimes. Melissa went home that night with the weight of an impossible choice on her shoulders. Her small apartment in the Queens neighborhood was quiet. Tyler was asleep in the next room, tired from another day of work. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands still trembling, and opened an old notebook. For 3 hours, she wrote down every word she had heard, every sentence in its original language, with a translation next to it. Mandarin, German, Japanese, French, Russian, Spanish, Italian, 7 languages telling the same story of corruption and greed. When she finished, she had 15 pages of evidence documented with academic precision. The sky was beginning to lighten when she finally put the pen down. What should she do with that information? Go to the media? It could put her own life at risk. Talk to Tyler? It would only worry him. Report it to the authorities. Those executives probably had powerful connections. Stay silent? 300 families would suffer, including her own. Melissa looked out the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over the buildings of New York City. She had spent 10 years being invisible, being ignored, accepting that her place in the world was to clean up what others dirtied. But maybe, just maybe, that invisibility could become her greatest weapon. The next morning, she put on her dark blue uniform as she always did. The yellow gloves were tucked away in her bag. She arrived at the corporate building an hour earlier than usual. The night shift was still finishing up. The security guards were yawning in their chairs, and the executives wouldn't arrive before 9. She went up to the 22nd floor with her heart pounding in her chest. The CEO's office was at the end of the hall, a grand dark wood door with a gold plaque. Melissa had never been inside. The cleaners only cleaned that office once a week, always supervised by a manager. She looked around. The hallway was empty. With trembling fingers, she pulled the brown envelope containing her notes from her bag. 15 pages of truths in 7 different languages. She slid the envelope under the CEO's door and quickly stepped away, her heart nearly exploding in her chest. She went to clean the bathrooms on the 15th floor, trying to stick to her normal routine, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. What if he didn't open the envelope? What if he threw it away without reading it? What if he was already involved in the conspiracy and came looking for her for revenge? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. Richard Harrison arrived at the office at 8:15 in the morning, as had been his habit for 20 years. He hung his jacket on the coat rack, made his coffee, and sat down at his desk. That's when he noticed the brown envelope on the floor. He picked it up curiously. There was no sender, nothing written on the outside. He opened it and began to read. The first page made him squint. The second made him sit up straight in his chair. By the third page, his face was pale. When he finished reading the 15 pages, Richard Harrison was shaking with anger. He didn't know who had written it, but he knew every word was true. He recognized the conversations, the languages, the specific proposals. Someone had heard everything. Someone had understood all the languages, and someone had had the courage to put it on his desk. Richard pressed the intercom button. "Jessica, cancel all my meetings for today," he told his secretary, "and hold all my calls. I need to be alone." He spent the entire day in that office rereading the pages, checking details, making discreet phone calls. He discovered that the Detroit factory was, in fact, profitable. He found irregularities in the reports that had been presented to him. He found suspicious accounts he had never authorized. He had been deceived, betrayed by people he trusted, and worse, he had almost become an accomplice to a crime without knowing it. At the end of the day, as the building began to empty, Richard made one single call to the head of security. "I need the camera footage from the 22nd floor conference room," he said, "from last night, and I want a list of everyone who entered that room between 11:30 and midnight." 2 hours later, he had the video in his hands. He watched in silence. He saw himself sitting with the 4 executives. He saw the door open and a woman in a blue uniform enter with a cleaning cart. He saw her cleaning, serving water, emptying trash cans. He saw the 4 executives talking freely, not even looking at her. And he saw something else. He saw the moment the woman froze upon hearing something. He saw her hands tremble as she served the water. He saw her lower her head when they spoke in Russian. Small signs that had gone unnoticed at the time, but now, knowing what he knew, were obvious. "Who is she?" Richard asked the head of security. "Melissa Thompson," the man replied, checking the list. "She's worked the night shift for 10 years. General cleaning. Never had a single complaint or problem." Richard looked at the paused screen, at the image of that woman they hadn't seen. A cleaner. Someone so invisible to those executives that they had spoken openly about crimes in front of her. But she had seen. She had heard. And she had understood every word in 7 different languages. The question was, who was Melissa Thompson, really? The next morning, a Friday, Richard called an emergency meeting. The 4 executives appeared confident, thinking it was to finalize the plans for the factory closure. They sat around the same table in their usual seats. Richard placed a brown envelope on the table. "Would anyone like to explain this?" he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. The Japanese executive picked up the envelope and began to read. His face turned white. He passed it to the German director, who removed her glasses with trembling hands. The Frenchman swallowed hard. The Russian closed his eyes. "Where did you get this?" asked the bearded executive, trying to maintain his composure. "It doesn't matter where I got it," Richard replied. "What matters is that it's true. You plan to close a profitable factory, falsify documents, bribe union leaders, embezzle company money, and destroy an innocent man's life. All of it behind my back." "Richard, we can explain," began the German director. "Can you explain in 7 different languages?" he cut in. "Because that's how many languages you conspired in last night, thinking you were safe, that no one could understand." The silence in the room was absolute. Richard stood up. "I have the security camera recordings," he continued. "I have a witness, and I have these 15 pages detailing every crime you planned. You have 2 options. First, you resign now, leave the company today, and I won't take this further. Second, you stay and I hand all of this over to the proper authorities." "You don't have concrete proof," tried the Russian executive. "They're just notes. Any lawyer can dispute them. Do you want to risk it?" Richard smiled, a humorless smile. "Do you want me to find out if I really have proof or not? Because I can guarantee one thing. I will investigate every account, every document, every transaction you've made in the last 5 years. And something tells me I'll find much more than what's on these pages." One by one, the executives stood up. They knew they had lost. Within 2 hours, all 4 had submitted their resignation letters. Richard watched them leave the building, their boxes of personal belongings in their hands, their careers destroyed. But there was one question that still tormented him. Who had written those pages? Who had understood 7 languages and had the courage to report it? Melissa had spent that entire day in a state of controlled panic. She cleaned bathrooms, emptied trash cans, mopped the floors, all on autopilot. Her mind wouldn't stop imagining scenarios. What if they found out it was her? What if the executives came looking for her? What if she lost her job? Late in the afternoon, as she was putting the cleaning supplies away in the closet on the 18th floor, her supervisor appeared. "Melissa, Mr. Richard wants to speak with you," he said. The blood froze in her veins. "Speak with me? Why?" "I don't know. He just said it's urgent. Go up to the 22nd floor." On wobbly legs, Melissa took the elevator. Each passing floor felt like an eternity. When the doors opened on the 22nd, she could barely breathe. The secretary accompanied her to the CEO's office door. Richard Harrison was standing, looking out the huge window overlooking New York City. When she entered, he turned around. "Please have a seat," he said, pointing to a leather chair. Melissa sat on the edge of the chair, her hands folded in her lap, still wearing the yellow cleaning gloves. She didn't dare look directly at him. "How long have you worked here?" Richard asked. 10 years, sir." "And before that? What did you do?" Melissa hesitated. No one had ever asked about her life before. To everyone there, her existence had begun the day she put on that blue uniform. "I was a teacher," she said softly. "A teacher of what?" "Linguistics, at a private university." Richard nodded slowly, as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. "How many languages do you speak, Melissa?" She looked at him for the first time, her eyes wide. He knew. Somehow he knew. 9, she whispered. Richard opened a drawer and took out the brown envelope. He placed it on the table between them. "It was you, wasn't it?" Melissa felt hot tears begin to stream down her face. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She just looked at those pages she had written in the early morning, risking her life to do the right thing. "Why did you do it?" Richard asked, his voice softer now. "Because my son works in that factory," she said, her voice breaking. "Because 300 families were going to suffer because of lies. Because Mr. Jenkins didn't deserve to be destroyed. Because it was wrong. Everything was wrong." Richard sat in the chair behind the desk, studying that woman who had been invisible for 10 years. A cleaner who was actually an academic. A woman who had sacrificed her career to care for her family. Someone who had had the courage to stand up to the powerful to protect the innocent. "You saved this company," he said finally. "You saved my reputation, and you saved hundreds of jobs. The 4 executives left today. The Detroit factory remains open." Melissa covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Relief, fear, built-up tension. It all came out in tears she couldn't hold back. "How long have you been cleaning bathrooms when you could be doing so much more?" Richard asked. "Since my husband got sick," she replied between sobs. "The medical bills wiped out our savings. The university closed during the crisis. I had a son to raise. I needed any job that paid the bills. And your husband? He passed away 5 years ago. His heart couldn't take it." Richard was silent for a moment, processing it all. Then he opened another drawer and took out some papers. "I have a proposal for you," he said. "I need someone I can trust to coordinate our international communications, someone who understands not just languages, but people, someone who can see what others miss." Melissa looked at him, not understanding. "The salary is 10 times what you earn now," Richard continued. "You would have an office on this floor, you would attend executive meetings, you would travel when necessary, you would be part of the company's leadership. But I'm just a cleaner," she whispered. "No," Richard said firmly. "You are a woman with a doctorate who spent 10 years being underestimated. You are someone with moral courage who risked everything to do what's right. You are exactly the kind of person I want leading this company." Melissa looked at the yellow gloves on her hands. 10 years wearing those gloves, 10 years being invisible, 10 years accepting that her place was on the floor, cleaning up what others had dirtied. "Do you accept?" Richard asked. She slowly took off the gloves, placing them on the table. Her hands were marked, calloused from hard work. But they were hands that had written 15 pages that changed everything. "I accept," she said, her voice firm for the first time. Richard extended his hand. Melissa shook it, feeling for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, the world could be a place where justice and courage meant something. But not everything would be so simple. The following week, when the news of the 4 executives' departure spread through the company, the rumors began. Some said it was an internal investigation. Others talked about an anonymous tip. No one imagined the truth lay with a former cleaner who now occupied an office on the 22nd floor. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Tyler found out about his mother's promotion by accident. He was at the factory when a colleague commented, "You know that cleaner from the central building? Became an executive overnight. Crazy, right?" "What cleaning lady?" Tyler asked distractedly. "Someone named Melissa Thompson." Tyler dropped the tool he was holding. Melissa Thompson was his mother. He called her immediately. "Mom, is it true? You became an executive." Melissa was in her new office, still getting used to the spacious area, the city view, the comfortable chair. She looked out the window before answering. "It's true, son. But how? Why? What happened?" "It's a long story, Tyler. I'll tell you everything when I get home." But she didn't tell him. She couldn't tell him. She had signed a confidentiality agreement about the whole situation. Richard had been clear. The fewer people who knew the details, the better. The company's reputation depended on discretion. So Melissa made up a softened version. She said she had been noticed for her qualities, that Richard had discovered her academic past, that an opportunity had come up. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it was far from the whole truth. Tyler accepted the explanation, happy to see his mother finally being valued. But there was a shadow in his eyes, an unasked question. Why now? Why after 10 years of being ignored? At work, Melissa faced other challenges. Her executive colleagues treated her with suspicion. How could a cleaning lady suddenly be on the same level as them? Some whispered that she had something on Richard, that she was blackmailing him. Others hinted at an improper relationship. The cleaning women, her former colleagues, also treated her differently. She was no longer one of them. When she passed through the halls in a blazer and high heels, they lowered their heads, exactly as she used to do before. The reversal was painful to see. Ms. Jenkins, the cleaning supervisor who had been kind to Melissa for years, was the only one who spoke openly. "Don't forget where you came from," she said one day when they crossed paths in the elevator. "And don't forget that we're still down here." Melissa felt the words like a slap. Did Ms. Jenkins think she had forgotten them? That she had sold out to get ahead in life? "I will never forget," Melissa replied, holding the elevator doors so they wouldn't close. "And I promise I will make a difference, for you all too." But making that promise was easier than keeping it. Melissa quickly discovered that her new position came with limitations. She could attend meetings, give opinions, coordinate international communication. But structural changes, improvements for lower-level employees, that needed to go through many approvals. She suggested a salary increase for the cleaning staff. It was denied due to the budget. She proposed better working conditions, more humane schedules. They said it interfered with operations. She tried to create an education program for employees. Postponed indefinitely. The frustration grew. Melissa had power in theory, but in practice the company's structures were too rigid for real change. She began to understand why executives became so detached from reality. The system isolated them, protected them from seeing the suffering of those below. One night, working late, she heard noise in the hallway. It was Ashley, one of the youngest cleaners, crying while she cleaned. Melissa came out of her office. "Ashley, what happened?" The young woman looked up with swollen eyes. "My daughter is sick, Miss Melissa. I need to take her to the doctor early tomorrow, but if I miss work, they'll dock my pay for the day. And I can't lose that money, I just can't." Melissa felt anger boiling inside her. She knew that situation. She had lived that situation hundreds of times when Tyler was a child. The impossible choice between caring for your child and keeping your job. "Go take care of your daughter," Melissa said firmly, "and you won't lose a single penny. I will handle this." The next day, Melissa marched down to the Human Resources Department. She argued with the manager for an hour. She used all her influence, all her weight as an executive. In the end, she managed to get Ashley to keep her full salary, but she knew it was a small, isolated victory. How many other Ashleys were there that she couldn't help? Richard noticed Melissa's restlessness. He called her into his office. "Are you having trouble adjusting?" he asked. "It's not about adjusting," Melissa replied, choosing her words carefully. It's that I see problems that need to be solved, but there always seems to be a barrier, always an excuse not to change anything. Richard nodded, understanding. The system is slow to change, he said, and radical changes scare people, but that doesn't mean you should give up. It means you need to be more strategic. Strategic how? Show results first. Prove your value beyond any doubt. Then, when you have enough political capital, use it for the changes that matter. Melissa didn't like the answer. It seemed calculating, cold. But she also knew Richard was right. In the corporate world, good intentions weren't enough. She needed real power, and power came from results. She threw herself into her work. She coordinated negotiations with international clients, using her language skills to build cultural bridges. She identified misunderstandings in contracts that were costing the company millions. She created communication protocols that increased the efficiency of global operations. Within 6 months, she had become indispensable. The numbers proved her value. The international division's profits grew by 40%. Contracts that were stuck due to cultural differences were finalized. The company began to be seen as a leader in intercultural communication, and with that came respect. The same executives who had looked at her with disdain now asked for her opinion. Those who had whispered about blackmail now praised her competence. Melissa had played their game and won, but the cost was high. She worked 12, 14 hours a day. She barely saw Tyler. When she got home, she collapsed into bed, exhausted. The apartment in Queens, which had once been her refuge, was now just a place to sleep a few hours before going back to work. Tyler noticed the change. His mother had gone from invisible to overexposed, but in a way, she was just as absent as before. Only now, instead of cleaning bathrooms, she was in endless meetings. "Mom, when was the last time we had dinner together?" he asked one night. Melissa looked at her son and saw the sadness in his eyes. She had fought so hard to give him a better life, but in the process she was losing the moments that mattered. "I'm sorry, son," she said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I've gotten lost in this new world." "Are you happy?" Tyler asked. The question took Melissa by surprise. Was she happy? She had money now. She had respect. She had power. But was she happy? "I'm professionally fulfilled," she replied, choosing her words. "That's not the same thing as happiness, Mom." Melissa fell silent. Tyler was right. She had traded one kind of prison for another. Before, she was trapped by invisibility. Now she was trapped by expectations, by pressure, by the system. It was around this time that she discovered something disturbing. While reviewing old financial documents, she found irregularities dating back to years before the conspiracy she had exposed. The corruption in the company was deeper than she had imagined. The 4 executives who had left were just the tip of the iceberg. There was an old embezzlement scheme, and the trail led to important names, people who were still at the company, people she worked with daily. And worse, there were indications that this had started much earlier, perhaps decades ago. Melissa took her findings to Richard. She expected him to act immediately, but his reaction was different. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, pale. "Absolutely." "The documents are all here." Richard was silent for a long time, looking at the papers Melissa had brought. Finally, he sighed heavily. "This involves very powerful people," he said, "people with connections. If we touch this now, it could destroy the entire company." "But it's a crime," Melissa protested. "We can't just ignore it." "I'm not saying to ignore it," Richard replied. "I'm saying we need to be careful, strategic. If we attack everyone at once, they'll unite and destroy us. But if we are patient, we can expose them one by one." Melissa didn't like the idea. It seemed cowardly, calculating, but she also understood the logic. A mass complaint would cause chaos, and in the middle of the chaos, the guilty could escape. They needed a better plan. "How long?" she asked. 6 months, Richard said. "Give me 6 months to prepare everything properly. We'll build a solid case, gather all the evidence, make sure that when we act, they have no way out." Melissa agreed, but the wait was torture. Every day she saw those people in the hallways. People who had stolen from the company, who had taken advantage of their position, and she had to smile, greet them, pretend she knew nothing. The weight of the secret began to affect her health. She stopped sleeping well. She lost her appetite. Tyler was worried, but she couldn't tell him anything. She was trapped in another kind of invisibility, knowing everything but unable to act. It was during this period that something unexpected happened. A journalist began investigating the company. Apparently, someone had leaked information about the sudden departure of the 4 executives months ago. The story was starting to gain traction in the media. Richard called an emergency meeting. The room was full of lawyers, public relations experts, nervous executives. Everyone wanted to know who had leaked, how to contain the damage, how to protect the company. Melissa sat quietly, observing. She saw paranoia setting in, accusations being thrown around, trust being destroyed. What she had started with those 15 pages was turning into something much bigger, much more complicated. The journalist, a determined woman named Jennifer Parker, wouldn't give up. She managed to speak with one of the fired executives who gave his version of the facts. Of course, he denied any guilt, painting himself as a victim of an internal conspiracy. The article was published, and the company's reputation began to suffer. Investors got nervous. Clients began to question. The media speculated about systemic corruption, and in the middle of all this, Melissa had to stay calm, keep working, pretend everything was under control. But it wasn't. The pressure was too much. One night, very late, Melissa was alone in the office when she had a panic attack. She couldn't breathe. Her heart was racing. The walls seemed to be closing in around her. She managed to dial Tyler with trembling hands. "Mom, what's wrong?" he answered, worried about the time. "Tyler, I'm not well," she managed to say between gasps. "Where are you?" "At the office. I'm coming to get you. Hang in there." Tyler arrived half an hour later. He found his mother sitting on the office floor, hugging her knees, tears streaming down her face. He sat down beside her, holding her like she had done so many times when he was a child. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked softly. "And don't give me that story that everything's fine. I've seen you destroying yourself for months." I can't talk," Melissa sobbed. "Is it about your job? About how you became an executive?" Melissa looked at her son. Tyler was 25, but at that moment, she saw the boy she had raised alone, the one she had protected from everything, and she realized he was no longer a child. He deserved the truth. "Remember when they almost closed the factory?" she began. "I remember. Everyone was terrified, but in the end, nothing happened. Nothing happened because I prevented it. And then, violating the confidentiality agreement, violating all the rules, Melissa told everything. About the meeting in 7 languages, about discovering the conspiracy, about the envelope that changed everything, and about the new discovery of deeper corruption that she couldn't expose yet." Tyler listened to everything in silence. When she finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. "Mom, you saved hundreds of jobs," he finally said, "including mine. You did the right thing." "But now I'm trapped," Melissa said. "Trapped by the secrets, by the responsibility, by the pressure. Sometimes I just wish I could go back to being invisible." "You were never invisible, Mom," Tyler said, holding her hands. "We just didn't know how to see you properly, but you've always been extraordinary, always." Those words broke something inside Melissa. She cried like she hadn't cried in years, all the tension, all the fear, all the loneliness pouring out in tears that soaked her son's shoulder. The next day, Melissa went back to work with a new purpose. She wasn't going to wait 6 more months. She wasn't going to play their game anymore. She had lived invisible for too long, and now that she had a voice, she was going to use it. She scheduled a meeting with Richard and laid all her cards on the table. "Either we expose everything now or I go to the press," she said. Richard looked at her as if he were seeing a different person, and perhaps he was. The Melissa who walked into that room was no longer the submissive cleaning lady, nor the cautious executive. She was someone who had found her strength. "This could destroy you too," Richard warned. "You violated a confidentiality agreement. You could lose everything you've achieved. And what if I do? Melissa replied. At least I'll sleep at night knowing I did the right thing. I won't be an accomplice to corruption just to keep a job. Richard studied her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. You know, when I read those 15 pages, I thought I had found someone brave, he said. But I was wrong. I hadn't found someone brave. I had found someone extraordinary. Someone who doesn't sell out, who doesn't bow down, who doesn't accept injustice, even when it's comfortable. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. I was waiting for the right moment, he continued. But you're right. We can't wait any longer. This folder has everything we need. Names, dates, amounts, evidence. We're going to expose them all. Today. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. What happened in the following weeks was like an earthquake in the company. Richard called a board meeting and presented all the evidence. 12 executives and 3 board members themselves were involved, some for over 20 years. The initial reaction was shock, then denial, then an attempt to cover up the scandal. But Richard was inflexible. Either they dealt with it internally and transparently, or he would take everything to the authorities and the media. One by one, those involved were confronted. Some admitted it, others denied it to the end. But the evidence was too solid to contest. Within 2 weeks, the company underwent a complete cleanup. People who seemed untouchable were removed. The media had a field day. Jennifer Parker, the journalist, got the details and published a series of devastating reports. The company suffered. Stock prices fell. Clients got nervous. Employees feared for the future. But something interesting happened. With the transparency, with the cleanup, respect began to grow. Investors who valued ethics started looking at the company. Clients who had drifted away came back, impressed by the courage to expose their own problems. And Melissa found herself at the center of it all. The story leaked. The cleaning lady who spoke 7 languages and exposed corruption. The media wanted interviews. People wanted to know who that woman was. Melissa refused it all. She didn't want fame. She didn't want the spotlight. She had done what was right, and that was enough. But she couldn't escape some consequences. The confidentiality agreement she had violated came to light. Technically, the company could sue her. Richard had to make a decision. In a public meeting with all employees, Richard made an announcement. Melissa Thompson violated a confidentiality agreement, he said, his voice echoing through the packed auditorium. She promised to keep a secret and broke that promise. Melissa was in the front row, prepared for what was to come. Maybe she would lose her job. Maybe she would be sued. But she had peace of mind. And because of this, Richard continued, this company is clean today. Because of this violation, hundreds of jobs were saved. Because of her, we can look in the mirror and be proud of what we do. He paused, looking directly at Melissa. So, instead of suing, I'm going to promote her. Melissa Thompson is the new Director of Ethics and Compliance for this company. Her mission is to make sure we never go through this again. And she has full authority to investigate anyone at any level, including myself. The auditorium erupted in applause. Melissa was in shock. She hadn't expected this. She expected punishment, not promotion. But as she looked at those hundreds of faces, she saw something that touched her deeply. She saw Ms. Jenkins and the other cleaners at the back of the auditorium, crying with joy. She saw Ashley, the cleaner whose daughter had gotten sick, smiling proudly. She saw workers from the Detroit factory, including Tyler, who had taken time off to be there. She walked up to the stage on trembling legs. Richard handed her the microphone. I don't know what to say, Melissa began. I spent 10 years being invisible. 10 years cleaning, observing, existing in the shadows, and I learned that the most invisible people are often the ones who see the most. Her voice gained strength. I learned that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and acting anyway. I learned that doing the right thing can be costly, but not doing the right thing costs even more. And I learned that none of us is as invisible as we think. We all matter. We all have value. She looked directly at the cleaners at the back. You matter, she said, her voice emotional. Every person who cleans this building, who keeps everything running, who works in the shadows. You matter. And as long as I have a voice here, I will make sure you are seen, heard, and valued." The ovation was deafening. People stood up. There were tears all over the auditorium, and Melissa realized that her journey from invisibility to visibility wasn't just about her. It was about all the people who live in the shadows, who make the world work, but rarely get recognition. In the following months, Melissa used her new position to make real changes. She created anonymous reporting channels. She implemented education programs for all employees. She established regular audits in all departments. And most importantly, she created a program where employees at any level could report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. But she also didn't forget her roots. She worked tirelessly to improve working conditions for the cleaning staff. She secured pay raises. She implemented more humane schedules. She created an education program where cleaners could study and qualify for other positions. Ashley was one of the first to benefit. With the new program, she was able to take a business administration course. Within a year, she had been promoted to an administrative assistant. Ms. Jenkins, who was near retirement, received a special bonus for her years of service. Other cleaners found paths for growth they never imagined possible. The company changed, not overnight but gradually, consistently. The culture of corruption was replaced by a culture of ethics. Profit at any cost was replaced by profit with responsibility, and the invisibility of lower-level employees was replaced by recognition and opportunity. Jennifer Parker, the journalist, wrote a book about the story. The Janitor Who Spoke 7 Languages became a bestseller. Melissa Thompson reluctantly gave a few interviews, always steering the focus toward systemic issues, toward the need to see all people, not just a few. Tyler thrived at the factory in Detroit. He was promoted to supervisor, then to manager. He was proud to tell people that his mother had saved not only his job, but the jobs of hundreds of co-workers. And even prouder to see her use her position to make a real difference. 2 years after the first meeting in 7 languages, the company was transformed. The stock price had recovered. New clients were arriving, attracted by the reputation for ethics. Employees worked with pride, knowing they were part of something honest. Richard Harrison called Melissa to his office on a Friday afternoon. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He led her to the meeting room on the 22nd floor, the same room where it had all begun. But now there was something different. On the wall, a bronze plaque. Melissa read the engraved words. "In this room, in September 2023, a courageous woman heard truths in 7 languages and chose to speak in only one. The language of justice. May this plaque remind everyone that no employee is invisible, no voice is too small, and doing the right thing is always worth it." Tears streamed down Melissa's face. They were not tears of sadness, but of fulfillment, of knowing that those 10 years of invisibility had not been in vain, that her humility had turned into strength, that her silence had given way to a voice that changed hundreds of lives. "Thank you," she said to Richard. "No," he replied. "Thank you. You saved more than a company. You saved souls, including mine." That night, Melissa returned to the apartment in Queens. It was the same small apartment, but now she could afford renovations if she wanted. She could move to a better place, but she didn't want to. That place represented who she was, where she had come from. Tyler was there, making dinner. They had started having dinner together regularly again. Melissa had learned to balance work and life, to not get lost in the pursuit of success. "How was your day?" Tyler asked. "They put a plaque in the meeting room," Melissa told him, "to remember what happened." "And how did it make you feel?" Melissa thought about the question. What did she feel? Pride? Yes. Satisfaction? Definitely. But there was something else, something deeper. "I felt like I made a difference," she said finally, "that my life mattered, that all those hours cleaning bathrooms, all those years being ignored weren't a waste. They were preparation for this moment." Tyler hugged his mother. "You always made a difference, Mom," he said. "To me, you were always a hero, before any promotion, before any recognition, just by being you. Melissa hugged her son back, feeling grateful for everything they had been through together. The hardships had been many, but they had also made them strong. At work, Melissa continued her mission. She discovered that ethics wasn't just about exposing corruption, but about creating a culture where corruption couldn't flourish. It was about empowering people to do the right thing. It was about building transparent and fair systems. She implemented an open-door policy where any employee could speak directly to leadership. She created ethics committees with representatives from all levels, not just executives. She established that important decisions should be made with broad consultation, not just at the top. And always, she kept the perspective of someone who had been at the bottom. When executives proposed cuts, she asked about the human impact. When they suggested efficiency, she questioned working conditions. When they focused only on profit, she reminded them about social responsibility. She wasn't always popular. Some executives found her inconvenient, too idealistic, but Richard supported her, and the results proved that ethics and profit could coexist. The Detroit factory became a model of ethical operation. Mr. Jenkins, who had almost been used as a scapegoat, was promoted to regional director. Under his leadership, the factory not only maintained jobs, but also created new ones. 3 years later, the company won an International Business Ethics Award. Melissa was invited to accept the award on behalf of the company. It was in New York City, at the city's largest convention center. She walked onto the stage, wearing the same navy blue blazer she had worn on her first day as an executive. She hadn't bought expensive clothes. She hadn't changed her style much. She was still essentially the same person. "This award isn't mine," she said into the microphone, looking out at the audience of hundreds of executives. "It belongs to every employee who had the courage to report wrongdoing. It belongs to every leader who chose transparency over easy profit. It belongs to every person who believed we could do better." She paused, thinking about everything she had been through. But most of all, this award belongs to all the invisible people, the janitors, security guards, receptionists, drivers, the people who keep the world running but are rarely noticed. Because it was by being invisible that I learned to see truths that others ignored. It was by being ignored that I developed the courage to speak up when it mattered. The audience was completely silent. So my invitation to everyone here is, see the invisible people around you. Listen to the voices that are silenced. Value those who work in the shadows. Because sometimes the most important people are exactly the ones we pretend don't exist. The ovation was immediate and prolonged. Executives from companies all over the world stood up, applauding not just Melissa, but the message she brought. Backstage, after the ceremony, several people approached her. Some wanted to implement similar programs in their companies. Others wanted to share stories of injustices they had witnessed. And some, surprisingly, were janitors and cleaning staff from the convention center who had heard the speech. An older woman approached, tears in her eyes. "I've worked in cleaning for 30 years, she said, "and this is the first time I've heard someone important say that I matter." "Thank you." Melissa hugged the woman, feeling the emotion of that moment. This is what it had all been for. Not for awards or recognition, but to make other people feel seen, valued, important. She went home that night exhausted, but fulfilled. Tyler had prepared a special dinner to celebrate the award. They ate together, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Tyler said at the end of the meal. "Of course. Do you regret it? Reporting it? Risking everything?" Melissa thought about the question. She really had risked everything. She could have lost her job, been sued, financially ruined. It all could have gone wrong. "No," she answered with conviction. "Not for a second. Because I learned that life isn't about being safe. It's about making a difference. And if I had stayed silent, I would be safe but empty. I prefer peace of mind over security without purpose." Tyler smiled. "You know you're my hero, right?" "And you are my reason," Melissa replied. "Everything I did, I was thinking about leaving a better world for you." At work, Melissa continued to innovate. She created a mentorship program where executives mentored employees from lower levels. Ashley, the former janitor, was one of the mentees and was thriving in her new career. Ms. Jenkins, now retired, would regularly return to give talks about her experience, inspiring others. But perhaps the most significant innovation was Swap Day. Once a year, executives would spend a day working in lower-level positions. CEOs cleaned bathrooms, directors worked on the production line, managers made deliveries. The first time was chaotic. Executives used to air conditioning and ergonomic chairs found themselves sweating in physically demanding positions. Some complained, others quit in the middle of the day, but some had profound revelations. Richard worked as a night security guard. He spent 12 hours on his feet, dealing with stressful situations, earning a fraction of what he made as CEO. At the end of the shift, he was exhausted and humbled. "I had no idea," he admitted to Melissa. "No idea how hard it is, how hard people work for so little recognition." "Now you know," Melissa said. "And knowing, you can do things differently." And he did. He approved pay raises for security guards. He improved working conditions. He created a career path for positions that were once seen as dead-end. Swap Day became a tradition, and year after year, the company culture changed. Executives who had lived a day as frontline employees treated those employees with more respect. They understood challenges they had previously ignored. They made more humane decisions. 4 years after the first meeting in 7 languages, the company was unrecognizable. Not in size or profit, but in soul. It was a place where people mattered, where ethics came before greed, where everyone from the CEO to the janitor was seen and valued. Melissa had become an international reference in business ethics. She received invitations to speak at universities, corporate events, and conferences. She always accepted some, using the platform to amplify her message. But her favorite moment remained Friday nights, having dinner with Tyler in their Queens apartment. They hadn't moved, despite being able to. That place was home, full of memories of struggle and overcoming. One day, 5 years after it all began, Melissa received an unexpected visit. It was the German director, one of the executives who had been fired for corruption. "What do you want?" Melissa asked, cautious. "To apologize," the woman said, her eyes lowered. "And to thank you." "Thank me. You destroyed my career," the German woman explained. "I lost everything. I spent 2 years without being able to get a job. My marriage ended. I had to rebuild from scratch." Melissa didn't know what to say. "And it was the best thing that could have happened to me," the woman continued, "because it forced me to look in the mirror, to see who I had become, to understand that I was living without ethics, without purpose, just accumulating money and power." She wiped away a tear. "Today I work for a small consulting firm. I earn 1/10 of what I used to. But I sleep at night. I have peace. And I learned that is worth more than any salary." Melissa felt compassion for that woman. It had been easy to see her as a villain, as an enemy, but she was just a person who had gotten lost and was trying to find her way back. "I'm sorry for my part in all that," the German woman said. "And thank you for having the courage to do the right thing, even though it cost many of us dearly." They talked for an hour. The executive told about her journey of redemption. Melissa shared about the challenges of changing a company from within, and in the end they said goodbye not as enemies, but as 2 women who had learned hard lessons about ethics and courage. 6 years after it all began, Richard announced his retirement. In his farewell speech, he talked about Melissa. "I met Melissa when she was invisible," he said, "or rather when I was too blind to see her. She taught me that true leadership isn't about power, but about purpose. It's not about being on top, but about lifting up those who are at the bottom." She took an emotional pause. "And now I have the privilege of announcing my successor. Melissa Thompson, who started by cleaning this building and is now the most qualified person to lead it, will be the new CEO of this company." The shock was universal. Melissa didn't expect it. She had grown accustomed to her role as Director of Ethics. She was comfortable there. But CEO, that was a whole other level. "I don't know if I'm ready," she confessed to Richard in private. "Nobody ever is," he replied. "But you have something that money can't buy and universities don't teach. You have character. You have empathy. You have the perspective of someone who has lived in both worlds. And that is exactly what this company needs." Melissa accepted, but with conditions. She wanted to implement even deeper changes. She wanted the company to be a model, not just for ethics, but for social justice. She wanted to prove that profit and humanity could coexist. Her first action as CEO was to raise the company's minimum wage by 50%. Executives protested, saying it would affect profits. Melissa was firm. "If our profitability depends on paying unfair wages, then our business model is wrong," she said. "We will find another way to profit, an ethical way." And they did. With better paid employees, productivity increased, turnover fell, loyalty grew, and contrary to predictions, profit did not decrease, it increased. Melissa implemented a policy of salary transparency. Everyone knew how much everyone earned. There were no more secrets, no more hidden injustices, and when pay gaps appeared without clear justification, they were corrected. She created an advisory board with representatives from all levels. Janitors gave their opinions on corporate strategy. Factory workers participated in investment decisions, and surprisingly, the decisions improved. People on the front lines had insights that executives in ivory towers would never have. The model attracted worldwide attention. Other companies began to copy it. Universities studied the case, and Melissa found herself leading not just a company, but a movement. But she never forgot where she came from. She kept the habit of working one shift a month as a janitor. She put on the blue uniform, picked up the yellow gloves, and cleaned. Some thought it was strange, others thought it was theatrical. But Melissa knew the importance. "I need to remember," she explained to Tyler. "I need to remember what it's like to be invisible. I need to keep my feet on the ground. I need to never become like those executives who once ignored me." Tyler had prospered too. He was now the general manager of the Detroit factory. He had gotten married, giving Melissa a grandson. And every week, without fail, they had dinner together, sometimes at the apartment in Queens, sometimes at restaurants, but always together. "You know what makes me proudest about you, Mum?" Tyler said one day. "What?" "It's not that you became CEO. It's that you became CEO without ceasing to be yourself, without losing your essence, without forgetting where you came from." 7 years after the first meeting in 7 languages, the company was at its best. A market leader, respected worldwide, a model of business ethics, and at the helm, a woman who had started as an invisible janitor. Melissa was in her office when she received a call from Jennifer Parker, the journalist who had covered the original story. "Melissa, I'm doing a follow-up piece," she said. 7 years later. "Want to participate?" "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How you feel. What's changed. If it was worth it." Melissa thought for a moment. "Come to the building," she said. "But not to interview just me. I want you to interview the janitors, security guards, receptionists, the people who really make this company work." Jennifer came and spent a week documenting. She spoke with Ms. Jenkins, retired but still involved, with Ashley, now a department manager, with Mr. Jenkins, who was thriving at the factory, with Tyler, proud of his mother, and with dozens of employees at all levels. The article that came out was powerful. It wasn't about a heroic CEO. It was about a transformed culture, about a place where people mattered, about the proof that another way of doing business was possible. 7 years later, "The Janitor Who Became CEO and Changed Everything" was the title. Melissa read the article with tears in her eyes, not for the mentions of her, but for the stories of the others, employees who had thrived, families that had been helped, lives that had been changed. End of story. And now, dear listener, tell us what you thought of this story of courage and transformation. Do you think Melissa made the right choice by risking everything? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between security and doing what's right? Leave your opinion in the comments. Your story may inspire other people. And if this narrative touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories we will bring. Your presence here makes all the difference.